You're all awake, alive, alert, enthusiastic, I see. How long will it last, right? Pastor Jeff said every 50 minutes we're going to have a break, and that's true. But once we hit midnight, no more breaks. We're going straight through to morning, okay? So I hope you have your pillows. And believe me, I have enough that I could say that would keep you here all the way till morning. We'll see how far we can get. We'll see who's left in the room, right? Last man or woman standing. All right. No, it is great to be here. It is great to look into the things of the Word of God with you. For me, that's entering sacred ground. A place I don't deserve to be. Why? Remember when Paul wrote about himself and he said two things that I'm thinking of. One, I'm the chief of sinners. And two, he said, I'm the least of all of the saints. You remember those words? You know who he was talking about? It wasn't about himself. Me. I am the least of all the saints. I'm the last person who should be here standing in front of you. But you know what? In God's sense of humor, to show his power, he puts the weakest vessel to great use. A mystery. We can't understand it. But I praise the Lord for my calling, part of which is I'm an interdisciplinarian. You know what that word means? So different disciplines I link together, and that's kind of who I am in my background. Jeff was asking me at dinner, Pastor Jeff, what were my degrees, and I told him, and I counted off the bachelor's and then the 3 master's degrees and then the PhD, and I said, you know what, I'm educated way beyond my intelligence, Jeff. It's amazing that I've made it this far. But, you know, if you buddy up with the right professors, good things can happen, right? And I'm thankful for all that I learned, and I'm thankful for how God gave me a love for different things. And he, in his sovereignty over the years, linked all these things together, which I could never see years ago, that all of these things were going to come together. I have a question for you, but first I'll just make this statement. I'm a teacher, and you can take the teacher out of the classroom, but you can't take... Exactly. You cannot take the classroom out of the teacher. So I may be putting you on the spot, individually or corporately. We'll see how it goes. I'm not really sure how it'll go. We'll see. But don't be surprised. So hide in the back if you want to be away. If you really want me to call on you, then you obviously make your way to the front and be easier. How many of you don't have to like or love, history? Wow. Either this is an amazing group I'm with, or some of you are trying to impress me. But it worked. How many of you love the Bible? Okay. Yeah, I don't see one hand not up. That's good to see. History is an area that's under attack. Biblical history, if you haven't noticed. It's under fierce attack. And that's really logical. Why? Well, there are a number of reasons, one of which is there are so few of us out there who are doing what I'm doing, who have been called to a ministry in biblical history. That's number one. I entered into this field, this arena, because I could count on one hand, with these 5 fingers. I don't have 12 fingers on this hand. The amount of what I consider to be biblical scholars who were well-trained in biblical languages and well-trained in ancient history. That's what I encountered. And I looked at that and I said, you know what, Lord? I see that the fields are ripe for harvest. This is an area where I can have an impact. Because since junior high, God's given me a great love for history. I remember I had a fantastic history teacher, Mr. Hawes. He gave me such a love for history. We had a World War II exam. It was 6 pages long, front and back, 6 pages. You know what my score was on it? 100. That's when I knew History's for me. Never did I expect God would merge that with my love for the Bible, but it happened. So we're going to be dipping back and forth between the Bible and history during our 2 hours tonight and our 4 hours tomorrow, or 2+ hours tonight, right? However far we go. And we're going to start off mainly with the biblical text. And I want to talk through something with you that's of great importance to me. And I think Pastor Jeff will appreciate this because of his own spiritual pilgrimage in this area. And that is day 1 of creation. 6 days of creation. Day 1 is our focus. That's all we're going to worry about today, for this hour. This is a crucial issue. How long did the creation take? And when did it happen in history? That's extremely vital. Oh, and by the way, the other major issue related to why biblical history is such an area under attack is because, number one, secular scholars know that this is an area where there aren't many Christians at work. So for them, it's an area where they can attack. But number two, it is a vulnerable area because of the opportunity for varying interpretations of the data to put you out the other end at a different place. And from my experience, and my PhD was at the University of Toronto, which Canada calls their flagship university, so it's a very secular university. I was in grad classes with professors who, whenever they could, took the opportunity to attempt to debunk the Bible through areas of history in front of a classroom full of students, more than who are here tonight. And I had to, and I already had 1.2, 1.3 master's degrees behind me, but I couldn't say a word. I was just a student in the class. And I was already, in my 40s. The professor controls the class. And yet, it bothered me greatly that there was no other opinion being offered. And it also bothered me greatly that these students are my kids' age, your kids' age. Our children are going into colleges and universities and studying under professors who are, with an agenda, attempting to undermine their students' view of the historicity of the Bible and the inerrancy of the Bible. And here's the thing. If you can prove, or think you prove, but if you can prove to somebody that there is a flaw in the historical elements of the Bible, all of a sudden it causes that person to ask the question, well, if I can't trust the history in the Bible, can I trust the spiritual message in the Bible? And you know what? That's a valid question. It's a very valid question. If the history is not correct. But the problem is, has that professor actually proven an inaccuracy in the history of the Bible? And if you ever get something that's a major issue and you can't solve it, you talk to Pastor Jeff, you talk to the elders, you talk to anybody you can, and you can't solve that, you contact me. If you have any doubts, you can find my email address. Where? Okay, how many have Facebook? I see some of the younger generation don't have it. Like my kids, they don't have Facebook. They're too cool to have Facebook. It's for old people, they say. Right? It's for old timers. Well, I have news for you. There's a real Facebook out there. It's called academia.edu. That's my Facebook. That's my Facebook. Academia.edu. Anybody heard of it? Oh, we need more people who know about academia. You got to become part of academia.edu. Why? Because people, especially professors from all around the world, not just the United States, all around the world, upload for free their published papers, their teaching lessons, their whatever they want to upload. They put it on academia.edu, and you or I can download it for free. So there are resources ad infinitum for you at your disposal through this. You don't even have to pay anything to be a part of it. I think you have to sign up and whatever. You give it, your name. And if you're attached to a school, I don't know about high schools, but colleges or university, you go through that university's spot on academia.edu. And so you're recognized as a student or a teacher or whatever, professor at that institution, and that's how your page is made. So you make your own page. I made my page years ago. There are over 83,000 hits on my pages of academia.edu. Isn't that amazing? From people all around the world, not just the U.S. And I see this as a fantastic vehicle to get information out there to people that can, among other things, counter the arguments of those professors who are attempting to undermine people's belief in the historicity of the Bible. Do you see how important that is? So I want you to, if nothing else, join me in praying for God to send more workers into this particular harvest field. Keep praying for all the other things you're praying for, all the other harvest fields. Don't get me wrong. This isn't the only harvest field. This is a harvest field. This is an important field. There are so few of us out there. Pray that God would raise up people who love the Bible, who love Him, and who love history. Because we need more. And if you're praying that prayer, pray that God would send us people where I teach at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas, right outside of Houston, 4 hours down the road. We would love to see more students. We have a small seminary. We want it to grow. We've already begun. We're 2 years into a biblical history and archaeology master's degree. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. So we have, a couple hands full of students, but we need more. So pray that God would raise up more people that we can build into them. I'm not going to be around that long. I want to pass the baton. I need to pass the baton. And I need people who are going to go to places where I haven't gone. There's a quote that I stick to, among other quotes, that goes back to the 80s for me. I heard it from a master teacher. He said this. He said, and this isn't politically correct, so it works for a male or a female, but I'll just word it in his words. Before that was an issue, he said, the sign of a great teacher is the number of his students who surpass him. Isn't that an amazing statement? So when I evaluate myself as a teacher, that's the criterion I use. How many of my former students are surpassing me? And that's going to show how well I've done. And you know what? I want them to surpass me. And you know what else? I tell them they need to surpass me. I tell them I expect them to pass me. I do. And they believe me. And you know what? They work hard. They take that, they hear that, and they're all in. I just gave a Greek exam, the first Greek exam of the semester. The lowest grade, you know what it was? 97. Now, you may think I'm just an easy teacher. Ask them. Ask them what course requires more time and more effort than any other classes they're taking this semester. You ask them. And if it's not Greek, I'll take you out to dinner. So, God has placed this time in history as a time when major discoveries continue to be made. And you're alive at this time. And many of these discoveries are now changing our understanding of how things happen in the ancient world. And they're verifying historical events that are recorded in the Bible that have never been verified before. Case in point, my book, my first book, which is now out of print. Anybody heard of my first book? Okay, it's called The World's Oldest Alphabet Hebrew as the language of the proto-consonantal script. Proto means first, consonantal means consonants. It didn't have any vowels. The world's oldest alphabetic script dates to the 19th century BC. Indisputable. Nobody disputes that. My book demonstrates that that oldest alphabetic script is Hebrew. Hebrew. I spent thousands, literally thousands of hours when you combine the research with the writing of the book. The first minor of my PhD at the University of Toronto, ancient Egyptian language. I took 3 years of Middle and Late Egyptian. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at some of the results of that study and identifying biblical figures that you never knew could be identified in the historical record. They can be in Middle Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions. So, if you're free, come tomorrow morning. Okay? All right, let's get into tonight. Day one of creation. I mean, I promised it, right? We have to talk about it. Day one of creation. Okay. First, I want to orient you. I want to orient your hearts a little bit. Anybody know of John Piper? Okay. Now we're talking, right? All right, let me walk through this with you. Years ago, during the January prayer week so this is now John Piper speaking, at our church, I decided to preach on the holiness of God from Isaiah 6. I resolved on the first Sunday of the year to unfold the vision of God's holiness found in the first 4 verses in that chapter. Here's what it says. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw he who is. That's the covenant name of God translated. That's the way it should be in your Bibles. Oftentimes you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's not what the word is. I teach Hebrew, okay? And it irks me that translations would not translate the word. It has meaning. It's rich and dripping with meaning. The covenant name of God. He who is. What does that mean? The one who goes on existing. That's the covenant name of God. When he introduced himself to whom? Moses. Where? Burning bush, Exodus 3. He said, I am. First person singular, right? For the grammar lovers out there. Then when the Israelites talked to each other about God, using the covenant name later in time that he revealed to Moses, they said, he who is. That's how it connects. The one who goes on existing. That's how God wanted the Israelites to know him, to think on him when he came to their minds. Yeah, your God, the one you worship, he's the one who goes on existing without end. Didn't have beginning, won't have end, he just exists. That's what God wants us to remember most about who he is. It's so important to him that he gave us that name for himself. Let's use it. He who is. I saw he who is. Wow. Sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Those are the angelic beings, right? Each had 6 wings. With 2, he covered his face, and with 2, he covered his feet, and with 2, he flew. Then he called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is he who is of armies. The whole earth is full of his glory. Then the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, while the temple was filling with smoke. Isaiah 6, 1 through 4. So I, that's John Piper, preached on the holiness of God and did my best to display the majesty and glory of such a great and holy God. I gave not one word, and here, catch this. I gave not one word of application to the lives of the people. This from a preacher who is committed to application, like few others. Application is essential in the normal course of preaching. But I felt led that day to make a test. Would the passionate portrayal of the greatness of God, in and of itself, meet the needs of people? Right? Great test. I love research. Anybody else love research? Yes. I didn't know it at the time, but not long before this Sunday, one of the young families of our church discovered that their child was being sexually abused by a close relative. It was incredibly traumatic. They were there that Sunday morning and sat under that message. I wonder how many advisors to us pastors today would have said, Pastor Piper, can't you see your people are hurting? Can't you come down out of the heavens and get practical? Don't you realize what kind of people sit in front of you, it must be, on Sunday? Some weeks later, I learned the story of the abused child. The husband took me aside one Sunday after service. John, he said, these have been the hardest months of our lives. Do you know what has gotten me through? The vision of the greatness of God's holiness that you gave me from Isaiah 6. It has been the rock on which we have stood. The holiness of God, His majesty alone. That's all you need. We live in a world where the mentality of many churches is, what can we do to meet the needs of the people? And the people come to us, right? And they say, we have this need and this need and this need. So we create ministries that address all of these issues, right? To widows and to orphans and whatever else we have. All of these, and counseling. And we can meet the painful needs of people, no doubt. And it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But when that becomes the centerpiece of our ministry, we've missed the boat. The centerpiece of the ministry has to be God. That's what people need more than anything in life. More than any counseling session, more than overcoming any problem or sin to which you can't give up. No matter what's going on in life, most of all, you need just Him. You need to see Him in all of His glory. You need to be satisfied with Him. You need to understand what He says about Himself in the Word of God. Forget about going to the Bible so it can help me become a better Christian. It's as if we become Christians and first thing we want to say is, how can the Bible help me become a better Christian? That's not the first question. How can I now serve the new master who has brought me into his family through the blood of his own precious Son? How can I serve him? How can I know him? What's he like? What is important to him? That's the question I tell my students. How many of us open the Bible with a heart that says, I want to learn what is important to God? Isn't that a totally different perspective? That is the perspective I need. And if I need it, I think you need it. I need to know what's important to Him. And as I teach my students in my Bible study methods class, every passage you go to, every passage you study, every book of the Bible of the 66 you study, and every few verses you're looking at, and every pericope. A pericope is a record of a narrative of an event that happened that a narrator writes about. Anytime you go to any of those, the most important question is, what does that text, what does that verse, what does that chapter, what does that passage have to say about God? Don't miss that. That's why we crack open the Bible. To understand Him, because He wants to be understood. He revealed Himself to men and women over a period of hundreds of years in what we call special revelation, where God doesn't disclose Himself to all people generally, like through the conscience. Everyone has a conscience. That's part of general revelation. Providence. God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. And nature, the universe. At night, you look out and you see the stars, and you know, uh-oh, this is way bigger than anything on this planet. How did it all get there? Right? That attests to all people, generally, that God exists. But then he specially revealed himself in individual circumstances to individual or groups of people and disclosed things about himself so they could so that all people through their mouths and their pens could understand things about God. That's why he allowed us to have his word all of these centuries. To keep a witness of himself for us to read about the kind of God he is. That's what it's about. And it's with that we approach Genesis 1. Here's the Hebrew text and my translation. And I'll answer a question that may be asked because it was asked of me once. I was teaching an adult fellowship group on a Sunday morning once, and I had my translation of Hebrew text up there. And a woman raised her hand, and I called her, and she said, "Yeah, I'm just wondering why you use your translation." And I said, "Because I have worked so hard to understand the Hebrew language, to get it right, that God has given me all the tools to translate it into English, and I trust my translation way more than I trust the translation of people that I've never even met." How many of you have met anyone who was on a translation committee of the translation you like? Oh, hand went down. Zero. How do you know you can trust them? How do you know their backgrounds? How do you know their theological perspectives? How do you know they didn't translate according to their theological bents? How do you know? You don't. You don't know. So I'm using my translation, and I'm hoping that I'm going to, in some cases, persuade you of the importance of looking at it as you see it up here. All right, so here's how it begins. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, and the word "the" is not there in Hebrew. It could be. There is a definite article in Hebrew, but it's not there. In the beginning, God created the cosmos, then the earth. I took a course years ago, in the 80s, when I moved from Ohio to California, Southern California, and I took my first college class. It was a history class, an ancient history class. And the professor said, you know, a lot of people here, may study the Bible and may believe in the Bible. I have news for you. He said, there's a story of creation in Genesis 1, and then there's a story of creation in Genesis 2. And you know what? They contradict. They're totally different stories. And because they're totally different stories and they contradict, you have to accept the fact that you can't trust all of what it's saying about creation. Because there's two different stories. How can you trust that when they don't fit together? Now, some people probably bought that hook, line, and sinker. I squirmed in my chair. I was already Christian, but I couldn't say anything. I was just a student. Years later, I think I have a better answer than I did when I was that age as far as how I would answer that or address that. And here's how I'd address it today. Can anyone tell me the focus of chapter 1 of Genesis in relation to creation? It's the what of creation. One word. I'm looking for one word. Overview. Not a bad option. Not a bad option. But we can do better. More specific. More important with how the text works. Chronology. Now we're talking. The word I'm looking for is connected to that. Order. How is it presented? Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6. Right? True? What's the focus of chapter 2, which also deals with issues related to creation. The what of creation? The details, you have a pulse. Let's get warmer. The what of creation, chapter 2. I'll give you a hint, okay? Here's the hint. And this is where that professor was way off. Moses has a habit in the book of Genesis, and that habit is he presents a sweep of time and kind of hits the high points in a narrative. And so there's this block, right? This long block. And then when he's done talking about that block, he'll go back inside that block and he'll hit a certain point and he'll put it under a microscope. He does that all the time in the book of Genesis. He's consistent. So that helps us to understand what's going on in chapter 2 that differentiates it from chapter 1. Any ideas? Don't be shy. It's the what of creation. What's the main focus of chapter 2, more than anything else? What's the main focus? Yes, mankind. Perfect. How important is mankind to creation? Yeah, not only very important, it's at the top of the food chart. That's mankind. So, chapter 1, the focus is the order of creation. Chapter 2, the pinnacle of creation. That's what chapter 2's focus is. It's the pinnacle of creation. God took chapter 1 and he mapped out the 6 days of creation. Then he zoomed in on especially day 6, right? Wasn't man created on day 6? Am I wrong? Do I have my numbers all mixed up? True? Zoomed in on day 6 and expanded greatly. So, there's no contradiction in stories of creation from Genesis 1 to 2. There's that same habit of what Moses does throughout the entire book of Genesis. Gives you the sweep, zooms in on one area, and walks through the details because that is most important to him in that whole narrative. He does it time and time again. If you don't believe me, read through Genesis and examine it with that question. If you can find those, you can. Okay, so in the beginning, God created the cosmos, then the earth. And you say, my translation says that God created what? Heavens. And what's the conjunction there? And earth. As if you're just citing two different things, right? That's not what's going on here. Chapter 1's focus is the what of creation? Order. Oh. Do you see this? Where are we? Right there. Do you see that right there? That is a Hebrew letter called a waw. It has a vowel underneath, a shawah, a silent shawah. It's a vocal shawah underneath. And it's pronounced weh. If you're European, you'll probably pronounce it the, but that would be wrong. It's actually wa. It's wa, not va. That is a conjunction. It's known as the waw conjunction. The Hebrew waw conjunction is extremely versatile. It's not like any conjunction in English. In fact, that conjunction is so versatile. Do you know what it can mean? It can mean the equivalent of any coordinating conjunction or any subordinating conjunction. Does that bless you or what? What's a coordinating conjunction and what's a subordinating conjunction, right? Coordinating conjunctions. And, but, or. Oh, we have a grammarian over here. I love it. I'm going to be pointing to her a lot tonight and tomorrow. I'll have to see where she's sitting tomorrow. She'll probably be back in that corner, but we will see. Subordinating conjunctions. Now we get our grocery list out. They're just without end. Examples? After. Although. For. Maybe not. Because, since, etc. Long list. Now, think of this. That one Hebrew conjunction can mean any of those options, depending on context. Much of the time, when you look at translations of the 39 books of the Hebrew Bible, you'll just see arbitrarily an "and" dropped in. I'm afraid that's just a mistake. As a translator, you have to wrestle with every single solitary "wow" you come in contact with to figure out, in the context, what is it supposed to be pointing to? When I studied Hebrew, our professor put us on the spot and made us walk through an entire passage, and every "wow" we had to correctly interpret what it was saying there in its context. Oh, that was hard. And guess what? Now I get to do it to my students. It's fun now. Then it was blood, sweat, and tears, yeah. Torture. So, here we are in chapter 1. The focus is on the what of creation? Order. He created first, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Pause. I'm going to come back to that. I'm getting too excited here. Let's start with what's in yellow. Bereshit. So, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim wa et haaretz. That's what this says. Verse 1. Bereshit. Literally, in beginning. That's what it says in Hebrew. In beginning. There's no article. Oh, there's no article. It doesn't say in the beginning. In Hebrew, you have several ways of communicating definiteness. Definiteness, what does that mean? If I point to that chair and say, that chair, I'm talking about a specific particular chair, right? As opposed to all the other chairs in the room. Definiteness. That chair right there. That's one way to do it. What do we call that? Anybody know grammatically? Demonstrative pronoun. I do this to my Hebrew students too. It's terrible. Demonstrative pronoun. It's the far demonstrative. Another way is the article, the. That's the easiest one. The chair, right? The chair, that chair. Hebrew has another way of communicating definiteness that's mind-blowing, and I can prove it to you if I have long enough, which I don't have time tonight. It's called one of a kind in the universe. One of a kind in the universe. If there's one of a kind of something in the universe, you don't need an article. You don't need a demonstrative pronoun. Because there's nothing for it to contend with. Nothing to confuse it with. There's only one. In beginning. There is only one beginning. How's that? There's a theory that's been going around the last 5 or 7, whatever it is, years in the scientific community. The theory is a theory of multiple universes. It's amazing what the mind can think of when there's nothing else to do, right? Brilliant theories. And of course, usually it's an idea comes and then you try to prove your idea. I have a brother-in-law who's a sociologist, and that's what I tease him about. I say, you sociologists, all you do is you develop an idea that you think is right, and you go out and find information to prove it. He doesn't like it when I say that to him. But many of them do that very thing. Is that integrity? I don't think so. Bereshit, in beginning, in the one and only beginning. Without an article, because it's definite, because it's one of a kind in the universe. Therefore, there's no other creation of the universe. There's no other beginning or origin of the universe. There's one origin. And this word is out of place with how it should be in the Hebrew text. It's out of place. It's out of what we call default word order. English has default word order. And what is that? Subject, verb, direct object. Good. Subject, verb, direct object. Jack hit the ball. Subject, Jack, verb, hit the ball. That's the object. What's what he hit? That's the direct object. Hebrew has VSO. So that's SVO. Hebrew has VSO. Verb, subject, object. And modifiers follow. right? That's how it's supposed to be. Whenever a Hebrew writer varies from that model, he is switching it up intentionally to put emphasis on something. He puts something in what we call in grammatical terms the emphatic position. Emphatic position in this case is in the very beginning. There's a prepositional phrase that's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to come later, at least after the verb. But it's in the beginning. You know what that means? That's like a flag waving, telling you, I'm the most important thing being communicated in this sentence. And you know what? Nobody even talks about this. Do you think time is not important to God? Remember I talked about that in the beginning? What's important to God? Time. He says it, for example, I'm just making this up, in the 10th year of King Jehoiachin, in the 9th month of the year, in the 12th day of the month, such and such happened. That, my friends, is specificity. It shows how important time is to God. If you don't believe me, go through the pages. Go through Kings, go through Chronicles. It will show you how important that is to God. That being the case, here is the beginning of time. And the combination of Moses and the Spirit of God who is working together with him to create this inspired text, right? God breathed, literally. They come up with this. Here's what needs to come at the very beginning of Scripture. In the one and only beginning, here's what happened. Okay? So if there's any question about the origin of the universe, that just answered it. Right there. There was a point of beginning that's connected with the will of God, and here's what God did in it. In beginning, God created the cosmos, then the earth. So next we come to the third word, and I'm going to that word because we're used to SVO, right? Subject, verb, object. We're going to the subject. Who or what did the action? Elohim is what it says in Hebrew. Elohim. Anyone heard of that? Elohim? You have it in songs, right? You know. What does that mean? Let's talk about what that means. It's beautiful. El, it's a long E vowel. El. El is the God who's the king of the gods in the pantheons of Canaan and Syria. El, the king of the gods. So, there are times Moses writes in the Pentateuch, and he doesn't write Elohim, he just writes El. Bunch of times. You can look it up and find it yourself. He is calling on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and saying, right, they all came before him. God revealed himself to them. Moses is later. He's saying that God, their God, and our God, that God is the king of the gods. Right? Because Moses lived in a world where there was a pantheon of gods in virtually every city. And many cities had multiple temples. There's a temple to this God and that God and this God and that God, and you can go to which one you want. Worship whichever God you want, right? Moses is creating theology here. He's telling us this God, he is the king of the gods. Then he does something with that word El that no other Canaanite or Levantine. Levantine means people from the Levant. You know the word Lebanon, right? That's a country. Lots of warfare. We refer to that whole area, so the southern Levant is Israel, and north of it is ancient Phoenicia on the coast, here on the coast, and then Syria here. So Canaan, Israel, Phoenicia, and then all of Syria. All of this is called the Levant. So, what was I saying? The Levantine... I lost my train of thought. Yes, thank you. So the people of the Levant, they worshipped El as the king of the gods, but they never attached a plural marker to it. What does that mean? It's as if they always use the word house, right? House, 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 but they never say houses for whatever reason. Okay? Never, ever, ever do they have houses, just house. That's the idea. So imagine there's this word El, and Moses is the first one in history we know about who attaches a plural ending to it. Im. It's that dot right there, and that marker right there, which usually is a letter, but here it's a marker for the vowel here. This is an E, long I, an I-class vowel, and then that M here. Im. Im means masculine plural. So this God, the King of the gods, Moses is pluralizing. El. How does that work? Why does it work like that? What's going on here? Well, this is what theologians refer to as divine plurality. How do we know that this exists? We can prove that it exists. Here, Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let who? Us. Who else? Who's with God? Who's with God before the creation of the universe? God exists in three persons. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. One God, three persons. How does it work? Nobody knows. We just know that that's what the Bible teaches. Let us, plural, make mankind in our image. So that's a focus on which member of the Trinity. Who is saying, let us make mankind in our image? Which member of the Trinity? The Father. He is the thought producer. He's the idea maker. He's the sender. Second, Colossians 1:13-16 will teach you this. This is more or less a quote. For by him, that is his Son, all things were created. What is that telling us? Yeah, it's focus on which member of the Trinity? Second, the Son. And what is his role in creation? He is the creator. The Father determines he's going to create the universe. He sends out the Son, the pre-incarnate Son, to do that job. Third, the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, right? Genesis 1:2, right in our local context. Which member? Spirit. He is actively involved in creation. He's not doing the creating. He's taking all the pictures, right? Marveling at the creation of the Son. Wow. The Trinity is cool, folks. What they do and how they do it and how they interact with one another, it's beyond what we can comprehend. It's like the perfect marriage, right? That you never get in life. They have it. It's even better. So, what is Elohim? It is the King of the gods who exists in plurality. You get that? The King of the gods who exists in plurality. That's who's the doer of this action. When? In the one and only beginning. What is the action that he does? Should I walk through this with you or skip it? We're going to skip this. Okay, I'm going to skip that. So there it is, the second word, bara. Bara. That's a verb. That's our main verb in Hebrew for create. It's not the only verb you can use to translate into English, create. You can use asa and a couple others, but bara is the main verb. In the beginning, in the one-of-a-kind beginning, the king of the gods who exists in plurality created. There it is. He created. There's no guarantee that this verb in and of itself means a creation out of nothing. You need to know that. But the context demonstrates that this is a creation out of nothing. Because this was the one and only beginning, wasn't it? So it has to be an out-of-nothing creation. There's a Latin term used for that if you've heard it, ex nihilo, out of nothing. So the question is, does this verb necessarily imply ex nihilo creation? Well, look at 127. So God created the man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. And guess what verb is there? Right there, bara. That's the same one in Genesis 1:1. Was man created out of nothing? Mankind created out of nothing. 50% chance. No. Created out of what? Dust, exactly. Part of the created earth is what God used to make man. So that proves this verb does not automatically mean out of nothing creation. Only context can demonstrate whether it's an out of nothing creation. 2:7, then he who is God formed the man from the dust of the ground. There it is. That's the material he used to create mankind. Adam, the first person. So the verb doesn't require that it's out of nothing. But again, in our context, it shows that it is out of nothing. Then we come to what he created. So, what do we have? Let's review. In the one-of-a-kind beginning, the King of the gods who existed in plurality, created out of nothing, what? Here we go. 8 hashemayim wa 8 haaretz. Two things. 8 there is this word right here. That is known as a direct object marker. It's just a flag telling you the next word is the direct object. It's really helpful when it's there. It's not always used, but when it is, it makes things easy. So here's what he created. First, he created ha-shemayim. Ha is the article. Remember I told you there's no article at the beginning. Bereshit, this first prepositional phrase, there's no article here. It would be right there. It's not there. And then Shemayim. What is the Shemayim? The Shemayim is fascinating. Okay, there's 3 ways, a minimum of 3 ways that an ancient Hebrew would have understood the Shemayim. But basically it's this, okay? First you need to know this. The Bible was not written scientifically. Did you figure that out yet? It's not intended as a science textbook. It's written what we call perspectively. Perspectively, the Bible is written. That means it's written from the perspective of a person standing on top of planet Earth. That's how it's written. Perspectively. So, when a person standing on planet Earth looks up, what does he or she see? Not lights, like in my view here. Sky, perfect. Now let's be more specific. What sky? Let's say it's daytime. The blue sky, which we call the atmosphere. Good, okay? Then, at nighttime, you look up and what do you see? You see stars, but if we can, it's hard to say you see emptiness, but you also see the infinite universe, the deep, dark, black emptiness of outer space. True? So when an ancient Hebrew looks up, and in the daytime he sees the blue sky, and the nighttime he sees the pitch black, dark universe. And they're both Shemayim. And guess what? That word, Shemayim, the ending on it, ayim, not just im, but ayim, is what we call dual. Hebrew has something we don't have in English. In English, we have 2 options for number. Singular and plural. You are good. It's been a good week for you, I can tell. Singular and plural. Hebrew has singular and plural, and wedged between them it has dual. What are things that are conceptually dual? You look at the person next to you, and you can pick out a few. Eyes, 2 eyes. Ears, nostrils, etc., right? Pairs. This is a pair for the Hebrew. Why? Because in the day, he looks up and sees the blue sky. In the night, he sees the black sky. It's a pair. There's a third use, major use for the word Shemayim. Anybody guess what this one is? The third use of Shemayim. Try? It's related to God, the answer. Think place. Heaven. The dwelling place of God is also used with this word, Shemayim. So that tells us that we have three options of what could have been created here. We could have a creation of God's abode. We could have a creation of the sky, the blue sky that's known as the atmosphere, and a creation of the deep, dark, black universe. Which is right? Not all three. Figure it out. Which one's right? Let's eliminate. Could it be the abode of God? No. Why? He's eternal and he already had his abode. True? It's not something that God created here. Could it be the blue sky of the atmosphere? No. Why? Order of creation. There's no earth. There's no earth. You can't have blue sky now. Guess what? Process of elimination shows that it must be what? The cosmos. That's why I put cosmos here. This is the deep, dark black of the universe. An endless expanse. So, how does this look? I want you to picture this. God is a divine painter here, right? He's Monet. He's, who's our other great painter of history? Picasso, right? He is the Picasso of the universe. Or Rembrandt, even better, right? Rembrandt. So he has an easel here, right? And on the easel you put what? Starts with a C? Canvas. Yep, puts his canvas up. And when he does that, and he's got his palette and it's full of colors, right? He has his smock on, right? His painter's smock. You have to have a smock or you're not really a painter, right? So you have your palette and your smock, and you have your painting brush. And what's the first thing you paint on the canvas if you are an artist? Anybody here an artist? Got to be some artists here. Shy ones. Yeah, there's one. All right. What's the first thing you paint on the canvas? Bingo, background. That's it. You paint the background. What color does God use for his background, the divine painter? Black. Except the painter is limited to 2 dimensions, up or down and sideways, left to right. God is not. He does his painting 3D. You think you're a cool painter? God's better. Then if you're a painter, what do you put next on the canvas after you paint the background? I'm going to hold my breath until someone gets it. Subject? Main subject. Good. Okay, I can breathe again. Good. The main subject goes next. Wherever it is. Usually it's in the middle, right? Strategically, you put it in the middle of your painting, but you could put it somewhere else for some other reason. It's usually bigger than everything else. That's what goes next as a painter. What does the divine painter put or paint on his canvas as the main subject? The earth. Wow. Isn't that cool? He paints the most important object next, the earth. And his 3-dimensional black canvas, bam, there's earth. So, you know what that tells me? Oh, let me ask you this question. When were the stars created? Day what? You have a 1 in 6 shot at this. And I'm not holding my breath. Not 1, Not 2. 4. Good. Day 4. So there's no stars in the universe that God creates. It's just pitch black and deep and endless, right? No stars. So any theory you hear that the earth is not the oldest object in the universe must be categorically incorrect. Must be, according to Genesis 1. Now, can we go back and prove this? I don't think so. Maybe there's a way that I just don't know of. We're going to have to get samples, from other solar systems or, galaxies or whatever. I don't think the Guardians of the Galaxies really went out there that far. They should have and brought back samples. So I don't think we can objectively test this with material, with equipment, scientific equipment. But according to the Bible, the first thing put in the universe has to be the earth. First, has to be. Because this is about the order of creation. Like it or not, that's the way it is. And if our science books disagree with that, you know what? That's okay. I can't prove that to anyone. But you know what? That doesn't mean it's wrong. What is it that pleases God so much? Chapter 11 of Hebrews is what I'm thinking about. What pleases him so much? Yes. Without faith, it is what? Impossible to please God. Can't do it. Can't please God without faith. There are things that God leaves to faith. And with it, one day when we stand before him in judgment, he's going to say, you believed that I created the earth first. Even when everyone else was telling you it was wrong, you believed it out of faith. And I recognize that. And I reward you for that. That's what I believe. He will do that. So, there you have it. There's a summary of the creation narrative in 2:4. These are and the word there means either stories or histories. Accounts is another word you can use. Of the cosmos and the earth, in their having been created on the day he who is God made the earth and the cosmos. So God does this thing we call a chiasm. Has anyone heard of a chiasm before? A couple of you? Good. A chiasm. So a chiasm means this. You say something first, and then you repeat that last. You say something second, and you repeat it next to last. You say something third, and then repeat that third from last. You keep going until you get to the middle. And you know what's in the middle? The most important part. Yep, exactly. What's the most important part of the summary? Their creation by he who is. You want to know what's the coolest thing about creation? The coolest thing, that God did it. That's it, that God did it. This is something to jump up and down about. You know what it must have been like when God created, it's day 6, and God's creating plants all over the place. Plants are sprouting up, one after another. There's a tree, and there's a tree, and there's a bush, and there are hedges, and so forth. He must have been jumping up and down. Wow, that was cool. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make another tree. Bam! A new tree. And he says, I want to make a cooler tree. So I'm going to go to the redwood forest, and I'm going to make this amazing tree. Bam! It's so big and pretty. One after another, they pop up, and God just enjoyed all that he was doing. That's what we need to be like, enjoying seeing the hand of God at work. So cool. All right, second verse, we're just going to read through it and then move on for time because there are more important things for my purposes we need later. Now, the earth was, and a lot of people will try to confuse you here and put in words that are not the exact meaning of the Hebrew words, okay? It's not about void. It's about unfilled and unformed, right? So the earth at this point was unformed and unfilled. There was no final contour to it. There was no land, right? And there was nothing populating the earth. It was unformed and unfilled. That's what it was. Yeah, it's a core. It would have been a core, a molten hot core, and water around it, and probably steam coming up from the heat of the liquid magma core radiating outward. That's what it would have looked like. So, and darkness was over the surface of the primordial deep. There was nothing, in the finished earth, there was nothing that could shed light or make visible what was there. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, as we saw before. So the Spirit of God was carefully examining and enjoying everything that the Son, the pre-incarnate Son, had created, with this most important object of creation. Then God said, verse 3, "Let there be light." So, there was light. So my question to you is this: what was the source of this light of day one? Oh. When is the sun created? Soul. Fourth day. Can't be the sun. Was it third day? Am I misremembering? Third day? Okay. If you're right, I think it's the fourth day, though. So the sun is later. Can't be the sun. What's this light? Aha. I've heard that theory too. The theory that it's God himself. If this is God himself, we have a problem. You know what that problem is? Verse 4, "Then God saw the light, that it was good, and God made a division between the light and the darkness." Has anyone looked at the end of Revelation? I know there are people here who love end times. I know it already. Anyone looked at the end of Revelation? What's the new earth like? How's it lit? God himself. What does not exist anymore on the new earth? Darkness. Darkness is gone. When God, the light of God, omits from God himself, it lights everything and there is no darkness. Is that true of this? No, because God cut a division between light and darkness. Therefore, this light cannot be God himself. Aha, yes, tell us, right. What is this light, pray tell? I have a theory. Can I prove it to you conclusively? No, but I think it's a really good theory. And nobody's been able to disprove it, at least, one-to-one to me, maybe at home afterward, but nobody's ever disproven this. What is this light? Then God named the light day and the darkness he called night. So it was evening and it was morning one day. We'll come back to that. Okay, now, what time are we at? Someone turn back the clock. It's going too fast. Always, my enemy, I have one enemy in life. It's the clock. Yep. Evolution. Does that work with the Bible? No. Doesn't work. Doesn't work anyway, right. Okay, the idea, I'm not going to use a loaded term here, but the idea that the universe began from one or more points and outwardly expanded, is that disprovable? Is it in conflict with the Bible, and is it disprovable? You know what? No, it's not in conflict with the Bible, and it's not disprovable. In fact, you can prove scientifically that it expanded out from a point, at least one point. Scientists are saying now that it's more than one point, and if it were more than one point, that wouldn't be a problem for me. But that being the case, that's not something that we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. So if that's the case, that one or more outward expansions from an original point is what began the universe, could it be that one or more places where you have this collection of heat and light and matter and energy and all of the elements of the universe in one place? What does it look like and where it is? And again, it could be more than one place. Doesn't matter to me. But if there's at least one place where God concentrated an enormous amount of all of these things, right? The building blocks of the universe. And all of that had the benefit of outward moving light. And if that light could be created in such a way that it was created mature rather than just beginning from nothing at its point, right? Like when God created man, did he create a baby? Baby Adam? Or Evette? Baby Eve? No. He created them complete. Same with the tree. Same with the horse. Every animal. Earth. It could be that God created this glob, however big and expanding it is, and when he created it, he also created the light that was expanding outward for it and moving for millions of light years, and a light year is a distance. Could be. And if he did it that way, then that glob could instantaneously be providing light on planet Earth and creating a shadow. Just like this, right? So everything to the left, that's lit, and everything here, that's in darkness. Instantaneously. And so that glob could be the beginning of the universe. And then on day 4, when God creates the sun for the earth, because now the earth needs its own native light source that can provide not just light, but heat. So if God expands, blows up, whatever term you want to use, this glob outward, and creates from that expanse objects, bodies, celestial bodies, suns and solar systems and galaxies and constellations and, you name it, he creates it all, it would fit perfectly on day 4 when he creates a local light source for Earth and for our solar system. That being the case, it's possible that the light of day 1, because wouldn't it make no sense to you if God creates a light and it's cutting light from darkness on planet Earth for day 1 and day 2 and day 3. All those days, it's cutting them. And then it's not till day 4 that he brings the sun. Would it make any sense of God that he kind of, made a mistake or didn't think about it hard enough or whatever, and he had to get rid of this first light? It would make no sense, would it? Why not just create the sun first, our sun? But if these are all the building blocks of the universe, and he outwardly expands them, it works. And you know what scientists have proven in the last number of years? I forget what year this was. Some years ago, recently. They have proven that the outward expansion from that original outward motion, that mathematically the light moving outward exceeded the speed of light. Isn't that amazing? The nearest movement of light from that point where if you could go in reverse, right? Play the tape in reverse and it goes backward, to the point of this outward expansion, that light was faster. The movement of that light was faster than the speed of light. And guess what? That fits perfectly with this theory, doesn't it? All right, one question, then we have to move on.
Doesn't it have to be that way? Because we have seen planets that are millions of light years away today, and if we know the basis of time for the Earth is 8,000 years old, the light from those planets wouldn't be here unless that was the case.
Exactly, right. unless that was the case. Exactly. So it fits. Yeah, the theory fits. You can go work on it and, prove it or disprove it, but it fits the universe, the scientific study of the universe, and it fits the Bible, I think. So that light wasn't a mistake by God, that first light for those first several days. It was important. Now, with this, we're going to come to an end with day one of creation. Look at the end. Look at verse 5. This is so cool. Then God named the light day, which is interesting because what he's naming, think about this. He's not naming the object. He's naming the impact that the object has on mankind on planet Earth. Isn't that awesome? He named it day, and the darkness he named night. So, it was evening, and it was morning, and I put a colon here. Use a colon for two things. One, to start a list. Two, to define something. Those are the two uses of a colon. You can check me in any good grammar. I can't guarantee online grammars, but any good grammar you check, those are the two main functions of a colon. So, and it was morning, colon. Now we're going to define that. One day. What does that mean? Well, with every other day of creation, all the others, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6, with all those other days, Moses uses what's called the ordinal number. Does anyone know the difference between a cardinal and ordinal number? You probably do. You're just sandbagging. No? Think of it this way. Cardinal numbers you can count, just like they're the cardinals in Rome. The Pope has his cardinals, right? You count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are cardinal numbers. Ordinal numbers, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Right? So every other day, it's an ordinal number. 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, 6th day. This is different. Why is it different? Moses make a mistake? No. There's a word for first. Moses didn't use it. He uses the word one. One day. Guess what Moses is doing? He is purposefully defining the time frame for one day. How does that look? The time it takes that object, the earth, to revolve one time completely around its axis so that where it began at morning goes through its cycle, goes into darkness, all the way around, and it's back to morning. That is defined as one day. You try to tell me that this means thousands of years? No, does not mean that. The only way you can try to make it mean that, and it's an abuse, is to go to another text like Joel or one of the other places where it talks about the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord essentially is an end time allusion to when the post-incarnate Christ, when at the second coming, the second incarnation of Christ, when he returns to the earth, lands at the Mount of Olives and, right, cracks, and he launches into his overtaking of planet Earth for a righteous rule. And that takes more than one day to accomplish all of those tasks. So, some will tell you, because of that, day can mean more than just 24-hour day. Well, my friend, there it is. There it is, right there. God saw the light that it was good, and God made a division between the light and darkness. God named the light day, and the darkness he named night. So, it was evening and it was morning. The earth turned all the way around one time. And then definition, what does that mean when the earth turns all the way around one time? One day. How long does it take to do that? 24 hours. You tell me that a day of creation means something different than 24 hours? I will never buy it. You are wrong if you think that's what it is. You can't redefine that because Moses defined it for us. Moses and the Spirit of God defined it for us. Isn't that awesome? Okay. There you have it. And with our time left, this was supposed to be 8 o'clock, folks. It's your fault. What did you do? All right, guess what? We're going to start this and see how far we get, and we're going to pick it up back in the morning if we don't finish. Now we're going to get a little bit more technical with you, right? I've attempted to address your hearts, if you haven't noticed, and I've attempted to, in some ways, address your mind, but now I'm really going to go after it. And you say, why did you save this till the last thing at night? Oh, boy. Well, let's give it a shot. Because this is really important, and I'll tell you why. And I know there are those of you here who have believed in an old earth, either did or do believe in an old earth. I'm going to attempt to give you a reason why, scientifically, a young earth is extremely credible scientifically. That's what I'm going to attempt to do next. Okay, does that make sense? You get that? Haven't lost you? Good. All right, this is a map of what we call the ancient Near East, just to orient you. If you don't know the place we're talking about, the ancient Near East consists of what in the New Testament is called Asia Minor, also known as Anatolia, or modern Turkey. Good. We have some geographers here. I'm impressed. Down here in northeastern Africa, we have what? Egypt. Egypt is considered part of the ancient Near East. Below it is Nubia. I took a semester-long course in Nubian archaeology. Believe it or not, who takes a course like that? Well, I'm one of the few, I guess. And then the Levant. I told you that the southern Levant, Israel, and the northern Levant, Phoenicia, and then Syria is here. Then the top of the Fertile Crescent, and this, of course, is the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia here, that's part of the ancient Near East. And it's a kind of a debate as to how far to the east you can go and still be part of the ancient Near East, as opposed to the Far East, which, okay, so, where does the Near East end? Where does the Far East begin? I don't know. Nowadays, of course, we use a different term rather than, historians who look back at it in ancient times, and we call this area the what East? Middle East, at least Mesopotamia, if not more, if not even including Israel. Maybe, some people would consider Israel part of the Middle East. It's really the Near East, but, call it whatever you want, I suppose. All right, so that's all the ancient Near East. And, of course, Abram comes from Ur, which is here in southeastern Mesopotamia. It's on the plain known in the Bible as the Shinar Plain, known to ancient Near Eastern studies as Shumer, or maybe to you as Sumer. Have you heard of Sumer and Akkad? This is Sumer. And so he goes, probably he followed a path along the Euphrates River, and, because you can't really go through the desert. That doesn't work in ancient times. You'll die. Follows the river, comes up here in northern Syria, and goes to western Syria, and then down the Levant and into Canaan. And then, of course, what we'll be looking at tomorrow is this area here, Egypt. All right, so this is my basic chronological scheme just to kind of orient you. Let's start at the bottom. Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 587. We can be 100% sure on that. There was a journal article written by a man named Roger C. Young, Y-O-U-N-G. And he is a friend of mine. He's an octogenarian. You know what that means? He's in his 80s. Yep. Great guy. I consider him to be the top living biblical chronologist. He wrote an article that proved that 587 is the right year for the destruction of Jerusalem and the beginning of the Babylonian captivity for the Judites. 967, that's when the construction of the first temple began. The Jews call this the first temple. We usually refer to it as the Temple of Solomon. But truthfully, it should be called what? The Temple of, a word you learned tonight. He who is. The temple of he who is. That's what temple it is, technically. That work began in 967. You can go to 1 Kings 6:1 if you want a reference for that. 1406, that's the year that the Israelites crossed into Canaan. That's the beginning of the conquest of Canaan for the Israelites, 1406. It took 6 years, six plus, from 1406 to 1400 was the conquest of Canaan. 1446, that's the right year for the Exodus from Egypt. If you don't believe me, read my article that you can download for free from academia.edu, my webpage. So if you Google Douglas Petrovich, academia.edu, first hit you come to is my academia.edu webpage. Sign up, become part of it, no obligations. You know, I don't make any money out of this, okay? There is an article that I wrote on the Exodus Pharaoh. It's the most thorough study of the Exodus Pharaoh ever attempted. It was a published journal article called Amenhotep II and the Historicity of the Exodus Pharaoh. That's what it's called. You can download it and read it for yourself. I proved to you that he is the only candidate that works in the Egyptian 18th dynasty or 19th dynasty. 19th dynasty would be a late Exodus, 13th century BC, 1200s BC. That's 19th dynasty. The correct dynasty is the 18th. And Amenhotep II is the only candidate who works, who fits all of the biographical requirements of the Exodus Pharaoh. 1876, Jacob moved his family from Canaan to Egypt permanently. And of course, he died there and was taken back to Canaan and buried. 2166, Abram was born. 2320, Nimrod's/Sargon's reign began. I have another article that's peer-reviewed journal article that I published in 2013 that equates biblical Nimrod. You know Nimrod of Genesis 10? Equates him with a historical figure. That historical figure's name is Sargon of Akkad. He is the first empire builder in history, if you don't know that. The Akkadian dynasty is what he started. The world's first dynasty. That's the guy you read about in Genesis 10, Nimrod, same guy. And you can read all my argumentation. It's my favorite article I ever wrote. It's the one article on academia.edu that more people access than anything else I have up there, which blows me away. Shows me how much people are interested in this weird Nimrod guy, right? Why? I don't know. It was fun for me, but why do you care? That's how much interest there is in this. That was 2320 when he began his reign, the first empire builder. 2650, that's an approximate number for the Tower of Babel dispersion. You'll be reading more about that if you end up reading, if the Lord gives me enough time and the ability to write enough. My third book will be on biblical history from the flood, especially the Tower of Babel, but technically the flood, to Abram, which no Christian scholar has attempted yet in a scholarly fashion. Nobody. And unless somebody beats me to it, I'll be the first. 3168 is the year of the flood. And it would take me another hour to talk you through why that's the right number, but it is. So that's when the flood happened, which means we're talking basically 5,100-ish years ago, right? Almost 5,200 years ago. All right, so sources for the universal flood in 3168. There is an article you can read on this. Henry Smith is one of the co-authors. When I told him my theory some years ago, he beat me to press before I could publish anything on it. He published. So that's how it works sometimes, folks. You give your ideas out and they can be taken away, stolen, whatever word you want to use, yeah. My book that's going to come out, Lord willing, third, Illuminating Biblical History from the Tower of Babel to Abraham. And then Roger Young's article called Usher Explained and Corrected. So those are three sources you can use for at least to launch you into the reasons why 3168 is the right year. Okay, so we're going to skip the eras of ancient Israel history, but there's an era of formation from Abraham to Joshua, an era of theocracy from Joshua to Saul. Theocracy means God rule. And then an era of monarchy, where we have physical kings on the throne in the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. That's from Saul to essentially 587, when Jeremiah the prophet he's not a king, but he's around in 587. And then from 587 to 445 is the era of restoration, where God's working on the hearts of his people who are off in exile and then brings them back in waves to what was the land of Israel / Judah. All right, now, how much time? We have a little bit of time. We can get part of this going. Dating organic material with carbon-14 evidence. You've probably heard of carbon-14 evidence, right? So every living organism has carbon in it, or him or her, every. And that carbon decays. And there's an element called carbon-14 that will give you a measurable decay rate so that you can mathematically figure out how far back in time that living being died, or that tree fell, or whatever it is, stopped living. So that is a datable form of evidence, and it's not something that we need to be afraid of. I've heard of Christians, especially a generation or two ago, who were so afraid of carbon-14 that they just called it something of the devil and, couldn't talk about it. And said, we don't need to discuss this. We can and we should. We don't need to be afraid of it. Virtually any organic material dated after 1400 BC by carbon-14 testing matches what is called by archaeologists, secular archaeologists, the archaeological historical dating scheme. So what I'm saying, and that's essentially my thesis for our time left, and maybe the beginning of tomorrow, our time, that beginning with 1400 BC, at 1400 BC, and going back in time from there, 1500, 1600, 1700 BC, that represents an offset. What does that mean? If we date, I'm coming out with an article probably in the beginning of the year in a journal called the Journal of Evangelical Study of the Old Testament on the site of Kirbet Kayafa. Has anyone heard of Kirbet Kayafa? No? That is a site that I'm going to suggest was the fortress that Saul possessed when there was about to be the fight between the Philistines and the Israelites, and David comes along and basically changes it from a battle to a one-on-one, right? They had a fortress. They weren't living in tents. If you see flannel graph stuff, teachers are putting up flannel graphs and all the Israelites are in tents, they were wrong. They had a walled city called Kirbet Kayafa today. It's the Arabic term. That city dates to the time when Saul was on the throne. And there's radiocarbon evidence that demonstrates it fits perfectly with a correct biblical chronology. And again, all that will come out in the article that I'm publishing. It's really cool. So at 1000 BC or so, there's a match between the radiocarbon evidence, which they found radiocarbon evidence in the form of olive pits, quite a number at different places around what's called the tell. A tell means a mound, so it was on a hill. And that evidence shows that it was around 1000 BC when all of this took place. And the Bible's chronology fits perfectly with that. So that's one example of after 1400 BC, where the biblical and historical and archaeological chronology, as we all know it who are in the field, everything fits perfectly. You match the radiocarbon evidence, and it fits with all of those other criteria. And you say, oh, this is so cool. It fits at 1000 BC. It fits at, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to show you an example of another time period in a minute. But basically, if you keep going back to 1400, now there's an offset. So the radiocarbon evidence, for example, will say that a certain event would have happened, a certain life form died at approximately 1520 BC. But we know from all the other forms of dating evidence that doesn't work with the timeline of the second millennium BC, which we can be sure about a lot of things now. And it's off. It should be 1400, not 1520. Why is it 1520? And which is right? So there is this offset. This offset is so important that it caused a rift in the entire field of Egyptology. Did you know that? It caused a rift. And guess who is on the side of those who refuse to give up all of these other dating methods and the evidence that's come from them, the historical and archaeological dating? Guess which Egyptologists are on this side? The older ones or the younger ones? And on the other side is those who say, because of the scientific evidence, we have to go with the date that's shown by the organic material. It has to be 1520 BC. It can't be 1400 BC. Who's on which side? Who's on the side of keep the historical, archaeological? The older ones. Sometimes, folks, there's wisdom with age. The younger ones say, we have science. We have science. Follow the science. It's cut and dry. Let's look at the problem. For example, the Bible indicates that Hezekiah 716, this is his rule. He ruled from 716 to 687. He built a water shaft in anticipation of the Assyrian siege by Sennacherib in 701 BC. What does archaeology have to say about the tunnel's dating? Well, this is his tunnel. The archaeological historical dating scheme has long said, and biblical chronology fits with this, has long said 701 BC is when the Neo-Assyrians under Sennacherib attacked Judah and Jerusalem. They wanted to overtake Jerusalem, but God intervened in Hezekiah's reign, disallowed that. But they attacked and they temporarily besieged Jerusalem in 701 BC. So what does the radiocarbon evidence say about that? Well, and there's Hezekiah's tunnel. So Hezekiah built a tunnel to connect the water from the water source known as the Gihon Spring, which was outside the city wall. He used it to make an underground pathway into the city so that the Jews could access the water, and then he put boulders on top of the old waterway that allowed them to go outside the city and draw water and come back in. Brilliant plan. So now the Neo-Assyrians couldn't take the water, and the Jews could. So that's the tunnel. I've been in it myself. Has anyone here been in Hezekiah's tunnel? Yes. All right. Isn't it wonderful? No. See, yeah, I asked the wrong person because I'm trying to get you there into Israel, into Hezekiah's tunnel. But yeah, it can be scary if it's dark in there. And you're holding on the walls the whole way, right? Almost the whole way. Or you have a light that's, over your head. So an article came out in Nature, in the journal called Nature, in September 2003. Radiometric dating of the Siloam Tunnel. That tunnel is also known as the Siloam Tunnel. A geologist and his colleagues found a plant sample, or plant samples, plural, under a plaster lining that was laid down in the tunnel when first built. Plant matter that was trapped inside the waterproof layer dated to, this is their words, 700 BC or slightly earlier. Wow. So, they carved out of stone, out of limestone, they carved out this pathway. And then, if water's going to be running through this the whole time, what did they have to do to keep it from seeping away? Seal it, and they used an ancient form of plaster. So they plastered the walls. So they applied the plaster, and now it's waterproof. And you can let water gush down there all day long, and it's not going to seep away. So they took away some of the plaster and found plant material, which obviously had to be dated to the time of what? Yeah, the construction of the tunnel. And what does it date to? 700 BC or slightly earlier. That fits perfectly with historical archaeological dating. Perfectly. And with biblical chronology. 701. is what you would come to studying all the details of chronology in the Bible. Awesome. So that's another example that after 1400 BC, they match. The numbers match. It's just before that they don't. Here's what they said. We conclude that the biblical text presents an accurate historic record of the Siloam Tunnel's construction. Isn't that cool? When unbelievers will say, biblical history is right. Wow. A problem arises, however. Now it starts to get dark. We're going into the problem. The problem arises with the matching of any carbon-14 samples to archaeological historical dating before 1400 BC. And Manfred Betoch has documented this problem. This man, he's probably already an octogenarian. He excavated for over 40 years at Egypt's most extensively excavated site called Avaris. Tomorrow we're going to learn this is where Jacob moved his family. He's a great archaeologist. So here's what he says in his publication of, what year is it? 2003. He says, in summation, the agreement between carbon-14 and historical chronology in the 14th century BC and the sharp rise of an offset a century earlier of up to 100 to 150 years, as well in the preceding centuries, only shows that the calibrated radiocarbon dates presented by these guys in this article in Radiocarbon magazine journal cannot be considered as a series where the precision seems to deviate considerably from the 15th century backwards. So he's saying, once you're looking at the 15th century, that's the 1400s BC, and you go back in time, all of a sudden you get this offset. It doesn't fit. The conclusion is the more cogent one, as within the historical chronology of the 18th dynasty with its dense network of renal and genealogical data, nobody could claim that a mistake of more than 100 years could have mounted up from the Amarna period to the early Thutmosids. So what he's saying is, we know Egyptology well enough already that we can't just get rid of 100 years. We can't just wash it away. It can't just hide. It all fits, going back in time from the first millennium BC, going all the way back. It fits. We know the times. We know the years. It fits perfectly. You can't tell us that because you have radiocarbon dating, organic material that radiocarbon dates 100 years earlier, that we can just fudge on 100 years. No. So he's telling the scholarly community, we can't just abandon all of this. And a few people got on the ship with him, and I'm one of those, and many other people got on the other ship, which by now probably is a bigger ship, or at least more people on it. Under such auspices, he says, one has to ask if it would not be worthwhile to investigate if a systemic failure in the Mediterranean carbon-14 evaluation could be discovered. Maybe there's a mistake with how we're radiocarbon dating, or there's some issue with radiocarbon dating from 15th century before. Or if the absorption of carbon-14 was, for environmental reasons, different from the 15th century backwards. Probably, we do not know what may affect radiocarbon and its evaluation process. So that was 2003. I went to a conference. It's a conference called ASOR, American Schools of Oriental Research, which is the best scholarly organization for the study of ancient history of the ancient Near East. And at that conference, Manfred Betoch was the keynote speaker on a Wednesday night. He talked about all of these issues. Somebody raised his hand and said, Dr. Betoch, what can you suggest as the reason for this offset? Right? What can you suggest? What caused this problem? He thought, he looked around, he paused, and he said, fog. Everyone in the audience, you know what they did? They looked at the person next to them and went, fog? Really? How can fog do this? Guess what? It can't. Not only that, and fog, for him, the focus was on the area he was excavating, right? Northern Egypt in what's called the Nile Delta. And he was thinking maybe fog works there. But guess what? It doesn't work everywhere else. And since he wrote this, we've found other examples in other parts of the ancient Near East that show the same problem that he encountered at Avaris in Egypt. Places where there is no fog. So this is a chart just showing the offset. I don't need to go into this with you. It's not that big of a deal. This carbon-14 anomaly before 1400 BC appears at locations other than Egypt. So there it is. For example, the Eastern Mediterranean. One such location is Jericho. Anybody know the city of Jericho? Yep. Where's Jericho located? In the Jordan Rift Valley. Good. It's in the Jordan Rift Valley. What's the Jordan Rift Valley a part of? Anybody know? Any geology freaks here? Not freaks, but experts here? Jordan Rift Valley is part of what? Dead Sea. Well, the Dead Sea is part of the Jordan Rift Valley. It's part of one of the world's largest and most dangerous fault lines. It's called the Afro-Arabian Fault Line. It extends from Mozambique in southern Africa all the way up through Africa, through this place, the Jordan Valley. So the Jordan River is in the Jordan Rift Valley in this fault line. That's why it's so far below sea level there, because it's a fault line. There's just silt that's built up there over time. If you dig through the silt, you'll get down to bedrock, and it's whatever, a couple thousand feet down or more. Anyway, it extends all the way northward into Turkey. How's that? Talk about a scary fault line. That's why earthquakes happen in Israel all the time. So, for Jericho of the early Bronze Age, so this is perspective. Moses would have lived at the very end of the early Bronze Age, okay? For Jericho of the early Bronze Age, radiocarbon dates are approximately 150 to 300 years older than conventional archaeological assessments. So that's the early Bronze Age. We were just talking about what would be termed the middle Bronze Age into the late Bronze Age 1, which is around 1400 BC, 1500 BC. That's middle bronze. That's late Bronze Age 1. And the offset there was 100 to 150 years. Remember that? Well, let's go back further in time to here, before Abraham. Abraham's born in 2166. Before Abraham, the dates are approximately 150 to 300 years older than what they should be according to what we know from other means of dating. So do you see the issue here? This offset increases exponentially as you go back further in time. Whoa. Really? Yep. The same carbon-14 anomaly at Jericho occurs for the late Bronze Age. The time that City 4 was destroyed, that's the city that was destroyed under Joshua, just after the Israelites crossed into Canaan. Radiocarbon dates for the destruction of Jericho City 4 are given in this source from Radiocarbon Journal. Results of the radiocarbon dating of the serial samples from Jericho are these numbers. So there are two ranges for it. One option is 1600 to 1566 or 1561 to 1524 BC. Given that Jericho's City 4 destruction dates according to biblical chronology, without a doubt, it dates to 1406. I proved that in my 2008 journal article that you can download free from academia.edu on the city of Hatzor. Dates to 1406. The carbon-14 dates are 120 to 160 years too early. So that's what they determined. So, and this is one reason why secular archaeologists have told us that Jericho wasn't destroyed when the Bible says it was. It was destroyed much earlier. Part of what they use is the radiocarbon evidence. But if you subtract, just taking numbers and subtract, if you take the second range, 1561 to 1524, and you subtract 120 years or so, it takes you exactly to 1406. It fits the range perfectly. So, I suggest to you that there is a way of solving this offset without appealing to, what three-letter word? Fog. The most important new resource, and I'll come to that in a minute, the most important new resource on this subject is a 2013 Oxbow book called Radiocarbon and the Chronologies of Ancient Egypt. The book cites many sites with carbon-14 anomalies, right? This weird offset, such as Jericho, Khirbet Batrawi, Tel Abu el Karaz, and other sites. So that's quoting from the book. Now we have a bunch of places that are all offset, many of which don't have the opportunity for fog to interfere, if it ever could. So my response is pre-1400 BC, carbon-14 dating is problematic. You see how that works? It's no matter where you stand, it's problematic. Another problem created by carbon-14 anomaly is the overdating of the length of archaeological periods. Also in the Oxbow book is the statement that dates the early Bronze III in Canaan, Israel. It reaches from 2900 to 2400 BC. That's a 500-year window, right? A huge span, which is 200 years longer than standard dating allows. So according to historical archaeological dating, it should be 200 years less than 500 years for this range of time. See how that works? So that creates a similar problem to the offset, which means not only are individual points in time problematic, but archaeological ranges of time are problematic. The only logical solution to the carbon-14 anomaly, I think, this is I talking, nobody else, is found in an illumination of biblical history and chronology. So, how does it work? Does anybody know when Moses would have died, according to the numbers I gave you, chronologically? In what year would Moses have died? 1406, exactly. What else happens in around 1406 besides the invasion of Canaan? That's when the anomaly begins as you go back in time. Moses dies right about the time that the anomaly ends.